Tonight, who's fighting for you? That's the focus of tonight's angle. Trump on the stump. He's back, strolling into a fast food joint in Georgia named The Varsity. He's mixing it up with real Americans. He's having fun, and he's touting his economic agenda.
Told them no tax on tips. Yes. No tax on overtime. Did that matter?
Yes. Yes.
She's worked here for almost 50 years.
Yes.
She paid tax for all those years of those tips, right? Really?
I appreciate it.
But not anymore. No more tax on tips.
Regular working class Americans love his policies.
45 years.
45 years.
Yes. 24 years.
You're too young for that. Come on, wait. I'll get on. Come on, I'll get on. That's got a good one. President right there.
Ah, flattering the gals. Well, look, Democrats like to claim that Trump is only interested in himself. He's just selfish. But the fact is, he's working his butt off. He's crisscrossing the country ahead of the midterms because he knows it's all on the line. And he loves his team.
Marco, you really did yourself proud 2 days ago in Munich. In fact, so proud that I almost terminated his employ because they were saying, why can't Trump do this? Marco, don't do any better than you did, please. Because if you do, you're out of here.
The happy warrior Trump is the best Trump. Now, remember the globalists wanted a president who would sell out the workers behind that counter in the burger joint. But today we saw quintessential Trump. He respects the dignity of the American worker. But what about the Democrats? Because they claim to be the champions of the working people. AOC in her shirt sleeves, Bernie going against the billionaires as he flies private. But look who's running cover for the Democrats. The New York Times, university professors, the entire entertainment industry, globalist NGOs. And we know none of them support the policies that would actually lead to higher wages and more prosperity for working people. So it begs the question, what do the Democrats really believe in, other than, of course, the trans agenda, open borders, the abortion industry, and, of course, protecting welfare fraud? So what's the Democrats' plan to grow the economy? What is the Democrats' plan to raise your standard of living or to counter China, heaven forbid? The answer? They got nothing. Now, Biden was actually the best they had to run against Trump, and we know how that went. The truth is, the Democrats of 2026 stand for nothing other than the belief that Americans are too stupid and probably too racist to be trusted to govern themselves. That's why the Democrats would love to mandate online voting, lower the voting age to 16, and it's why they hate voter ID. But the Trump agenda is clear. Day after day, he and his team are methodically working to reduce inflation, attract new industry, remove illegals, bring down the cost of housing, prescription drugs, make our streets safer, and in foreign affairs, come on, promote peace whenever and wherever possible.
There's nothing more important than peace, and there's nothing less expensive than peace. You know, when you go to wars, it costs you 100 times what it costs to make peace.
What other president in recent memory cared so much about the enormous costs of war? Not just for the people, the brave people who fight, but for the people back home who pay for it. Remember, if Trump had played the DC game like so many presidents do and just went along with whatever the old establishment wanted, he'd be one of their favorite Republicans, standing O in every room. But Trump decided to color outside the lines. Even in the people he brought in to negotiate the important deals, negotiate the Israel-Gaza peace deal.
I want to thank every nation that helped us achieve this monumental breakthrough, saving countless lives and really bringing peace and bringing the concept of peace, because nobody thought peace in the Middle East. I've always heard peace in the Middle East is impossible, and it's turned out not to be.
Trump isn't trying to kick problems down the road for his successors to have to solve. That's what everyone else did. He's actually trying to solve the problems. And I'm telling you, it is hard. That's why a lot of people don't even try. Of course, rather than supporting his peace board, Democrats find a way to criticize it.
There are a lot of countries with whom we normally work very closely and with whom we are aligned geopolitically and in terms of values that are not on the board of peace. And so I think it's reasonable for us to wonder whether something in terms of a, I don't know, competitive structure to sort of either undermine the UN or circumvent the UN.
Yeah, ludicrous response. Is Senator Schatz dumb, or does he think we're dumb? Because no one, and I mean not a single sentient human being on God's green earth, thinks the UN is going to bring peace to any part of the world. After all, why didn't Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan just go to the UN if it's so easy and just solve the Gaza situation? America is the indispensable nation, but you have to have competent people at the helm. And by the way, this is classic Trump. He wants to cut through the diplomatic red tape in an effort to get to a resolution expeditiously, by the way. So if the Democrats really cared about peace, they'd be applauding Trump's efforts, at least saying, let us work with you. Good for you. Instead, all they got is gripes. And it's like this with every issue, right? Because if Democrats really cared about the environment, the green agenda, they would be furious about the horrendous sewage pouring into the Potomac. But no. They'd blame Trump for that. If Democrats really cared about athletes, their obligation to speak out against human rights abuses, they would be pressing Eileen Gu to criticize China. Thank you very much. And if Democrats really cared about the children, they would be angry about all those missing kids at the border. They'd be angry that the schools are in such bad shape. And if Democrats really cared about free speech, they claim to, they would be furious about how the EU is limiting the ability of its own citizens to criticize their own government. And if Democrats really cared about respecting our allies, they would be angry that AOC went to Munich and didn't bother to pick up a book to learn about any of the issues. Now, the reason is because Democrats don't really care about any of those things. They only care about winning so they can boss you around and impeach Trump. Raw power. But President Trump actually cares about the things that matter. He always has. He believes that anything is possible in the United States. It's at its core such an optimistic vision. And as Democrats are trashing America on the world stage, he's bringing the world stage to D.C. Maybe not everyone.
Almost everybody's accepted, and the ones that haven't will be. Some are playing a little cute. It doesn't work. You can't play cute with me. But they're playing a little bit. But they're all joining. Everybody, most of them very immediately. A few that we really don't want because they're trouble.
Now, of course, as this is all playing out, again, economic, foreign policy, agenda items one after the other ticked off. Expect that Democrats will keep screaming about Epstein because they have nothing else. They have no answer to Trump's successes. They could do none of these things when Biden was in power. And Kamala, should just be, changing her Depends if she were in the Oval Office right now. So you got robust job growth, you have slowing inflation, you have a booming industrial production. He's turned out to be right about pretty much all of it. And that's the angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.